Tonight on Greater Boston, President-elect Joe Biden is moving forward with his transition plans, while Donald Trump is moving forward with his obstruction plans. Ahead, three-time presidential transition pro David Gergen joins me on the battle ahead for Biden and the challenges he'll face with the current administration and with members of his own party. Then later, the president's niece, Mary Trump, weighs in on just how far she thinks her uncle may go in the days and weeks ahead. After 2 days of relative quiet since the presidential race was called, Donald Trump ramped things up this afternoon, announcing via Twitter, of course, that Defense Secretary Mark Esper has been terminated, immediately replaced by Counterterrorism Chief Christopher Miller. It's a move the president reportedly had wanted to make for months, especially after Esper publicly said back in June that he did not support Trump using active duty troops to control Black Lives Matter protesters. And the questions on the minds of many is, who will be the next to go? We'll get into that in much more detail later in the show. But for now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are pushing full steam ahead with their transition plans as the newly minted president-elect and vice president-elect after an historic first appearance together on Saturday night.
We're seeing all over this nation, all cities and all parts of the country, indeed across the world, an outpouring of joy, of hope, renewed faith.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
And for many, the Black Americans who've watched as ideals of white supremacy have been embraced and racial divides have widened across the nation. The hundreds of children who were brought across the border and now may never see their parents again. The so-called dreamers and asylum seekers who feared deportation every day. The Muslim Americans who've been ostracized and vilified. The military veterans and Gold Star families who've been forced to listen to talk of losers and suckers. The LGBTQ community who've been under constant attack. The disabled Americans who've been cruelly mocked and bullied. The environmental activists who've watched the rollback of more than 100 protection policies and the country's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords. And even other foreign leaders who've been unable to anticipate or even trust the promises and proclamations coming from America, too often in the form of tweets. For them, Saturday was the first real sense of relief in 4 years. And already Biden is getting down to work, putting in place a 13-member coronavirus task force, promising a process grounded in science. Do you believe he had to say that? And while he celebrated today's news from Pfizer of a vaccine the company says looks to be 90% effective in early analysis, Biden also noted it'll be many months before we see widespread vaccination, and we all need to do our part now.
As we work toward a safe and effective vaccine, we know the single most effective thing we can do to stop the spread of COVID is wear a mask. This is a crisis that affects everyone. It's time to end the politicization of basic, responsible public health steps like mask wearing and social distancing. We have to come together to heal the soul of this country so that we can effectively address this crisis.
Not quite the sentiment we've been hearing from the top lately, even as confirmed COVID cases in the U.S. hit 10 million today, with more than 56,000 people in hospitals, 11,000 plus of whom are in ICUs, according to the COVID Tracking Project. And as big a crisis as that is for the incoming president, it's being made all the more difficult by the current president's refusal to concede and help usher in the transition of power. Still, Biden and his team are forging on. Now joined by a man who's helped guide a presidential transition or two himself, David Gergen. David served as an advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton, and is now with the Harvard Kennedy School. David, great to see you as always.
Good to see you, Jeff.
So the good news is Biden is already at work. The bad news, no cooperation from the current administration, and some unknown bureaucrat at the General Services Administration won't turn on the spigot for money to flow to the transition effort. How big a problem are both those things?
Well, the fact that the General Services Administration won't turn over the keys is significant because Biden only has 10 weeks to get the launch. And in January 20th, he gets underway regardless of where things stand. And those 10 weeks are precious, Jim. You need every moment there to go into the various agencies, send in teams to interview the people who are there now in all these different agencies across the government, to get recommendations about people, about policies and that sort of thing. That is not happening now. The Biden people are ready to go with those teams, but that is not happening. What the Biden people have been good about is they foresaw that the GSA might drag its heels. And so the Biden committee realized that the money that normally goes to fund a transition, usually up to $10 million, provided by the government, pays for the salaries of people in transition and the like. That money is being withheld. And the Biden people have already launched, fundraising drive before this, so they have some money in reserve to cover that. That's, I think, shows the professionalism of the group that's coming in. There are a lot of these people who have been through these issues before and they're experienced, and they're going to bring I think, a much greater sense of competence, capacity than what we've been seeing the last 4 years.
One way or another, January 20th is going to come, and I don't know, Sean Hannity may swear in Donald Trump, but a justice, I'm sure, is going to swear in Joe Biden.
Yes.
You wrote a piece for the Globe, Can He Govern? Let me get on the list of things that seems to me are the potential obstacles for that, quickly if we can. One, Mitch McConnell remains the leader of the Senate, assuming the Democrats don't win both of those elections in Georgia. Is there any reason to think that Mitch McConnell won't keep being Mitch McConnell?
Well, there is one element that is encouraging, and that is in the past, Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden have actually had a good working relationship. They've called each other friends. Interestingly, Jim, I did not know this. When at the burial of Beau Biden, the prized son of Joe Biden, there was one Republican senator who went to that burial service, and that was Mitch McConnell.
I did not know that.
I did not know that either, and that gave me encouragement. At the same time, word is coming out of the Biden camp that he wants to put an even tighter rein on Joe Biden than he had put on Obama. And as you know, he wanted to bring Obama down. That was the main purpose from day one. And there have been indications that tight rein, that McConnell wants to have a veto power and exercise that veto power for every single member of the Biden cabinet. Now, that's unheard of. We've never had anything like that. It's always been a presumption that a new president was entitled to pick his own team.
Sure.
And unless you're totally in the mainstream or you have all sorts of ethical problems, everybody has been confirmed. It would be outrageous and I think very, very damning if Mitch McConnell does that, exercises that kind of power.
So item number 2, dissent in his own party. You have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez giving a very tough interview to the New York Times, basically warning the administration not to mess around with progressives, include them. And you have people like Connor Lamb, a moderate from Pennsylvania, saying all that radical talk about defunding the police, that's why we didn't do so well last week. Right. Is that a battle that Joe Biden can deal with?
He's one of the only people, I think, who can handle something like that, who has the negotiating capacity and the empathy to do that. And I think that's one of the things that bodes well for Biden, that he has that capacity. But this is this split between the moderates and progressives is very real. There was a phone call that's been reported this past week. It was a couple of hours with the House caucus, the progressives and the moderates, and they got into shouting matches in there. Because the moderates feel very strongly that they lost some members and came within a hair's breadth of just losing some more, because the right was able to put out the word, this is all socialism. It's going to lead us down the garden path to socialism. But at the same time, the progressives feel, with justification, that they kept their mouths shut during the campaign, did not push on their proposals, but with the understanding they would do it after the election was over. How do you reconcile those two things with your cross pressures? I think it's going to be one of the toughest problems that Biden faces, but also I think he's one of the people most qualified, most capable of meeting it.
Well, I also don't know how you reconcile it when every dollar that would be needed for the progressive policies that Joe Biden evolved into supporting would require eliminating the tax cuts for the wealthy handed out by Donald Trump. That's not going to pass in a Mitch McConnell Senate.
The issue is that so many things may be sent to a graveyard over in Mitch McConnell's office. And they'll just die, like the taxes. But that is a real issue. These are real issues.
Obstacle 3, 70 million voters who didn't have to just listen to candidate Trump's promises, but saw what Donald Trump delivered and said, "You're my man." What happens with them?
Well, I think that is a big question. The way the president is acting now, the childish behavior we're seeing out of the Oval Office, almost like he's trying to, as one story this week that he was going to barricade himself in the Oval Office. You see that and you realize that Trump doesn't want to leave the stage. He may be out of office, but he does not want to leave the stage. And I do think we're seeing the makings of a revitalized base that he will be in charge of, and he will be Mr. Republican. Indeed, he will try to become a shadow president. I think that's a very real danger. We've never had that before. But it could be debilitating for Biden. What the president is doing right now, I don't know whether he thinks he can win these lawsuits or not, but he is really sowing the seeds for people who believe that this was a stolen election at the left, that the Democrats stole this election, which is totally unfair and totally inaccurate. And they still haven't produced the evidence. We were supposed to see lawsuits by the end of the day today, with the evidence. The lawsuits haven't been filed. What does that tell us?
Well, Rudy Giuliani is busy working with that convicted sex offender in Pennsylvania, so he's too busy to deal with. David, it is the most over-asked question about the GOP and its leaders, so to speak. But I'll tell you, I assume the two critical steps to getting things moving were, one, Joe Biden continuing to say what he says relentlessly. I was elected as a proud Democrat, but I will serve all Americans. Check that box off. But also for Republican leaders not to say we're buying into your agenda, but at minimum saying we accept your legitimacy. If anything, people like Lindsey Graham are fanning the flames that are being lit by Donald Trump. I don't get this at all. It
almost seems suicidal in some ways for the Republican Party. Why would you want to offend? It's one thing to stir up your base. It's another thing to give deep offense to everybody else, including independents, because you're so selfish and so self-centered. So the person who's being hurt the most right now by this is Donald Trump. He is believe that we've never had him to leave the office in this way. For 200 years, people have left the office graciously and with grace, and they've supported their successor even though they didn't agree with that person. That's a long-standing tradition. It goes all the way back to George Washington. Washington felt strongly about it, and all other presidents have honored it. So we are making history, but the wrong kind of history. I think historians will puzzle for years. How in the heck did we ever get to this point with this kind of man running things in this way?
Will those same historians say that Donald Trump is the worst president we've had?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was with a scholar, household name, the other day, and we got into that conversation, and he said he was having a big debates with his friends. Is Donald Trump the worst, or was Andrew Johnson the worst? But it came down to two.
So, David, you've spent a lifetime giving advice to presidents. If this president-elect were to approach you and said, give me a few minutes and tell me how to deal with all these obstacles that you and Jim Browder just laid out on his television show, what would you tell Joe Biden?
I would tell him the most important thing is to be authentic, to be himself as a way, and be completely honest and transparent as a way to rebuild trust. I think we have to open the door to higher levels of trust across parties, within parties. From people who are supporting Donald Trump, people not supporting Donald Trump. We in Cambridge and Boston area, we do live in something of a bubble here. We have to be part of a process of trying to understand the people who lost, the people who are running. I think it's unfathomable to us, many of us. How could 60+ million people vote knowingly for Donald Trump for a second term? It was one thing to be an accidental president, aberrational president, but it's a totally different picture when you elect him twice. It says more about you than it says about him. And so we have to be, we need to do some soul searching of our own. It's not just about policy. It is about the civic culture and improving the civic culture so we can work with each other through these crises. Not since FDR, we had any president who's inherited as many deep crises as Joe Biden has, but he has a weak hand given all these other things. And that's concerning. I think over time, he can build up a level of trust. Mm-hmm. It won't happen overnight, but it can be done. I was there when Nixon left, and we thought we'd never see, the light again. And Jerry Ford comes in. He's a healer. and by golly, things change. People, country calm down, and Ford gets a lot of credit in terms of his legacy. So I think that can be done again. I'll tell you this, just finish. I don't want to talk on too long. If you had to look for one person from the political world who might be able to bring us back together, I really do believe it's Joe Biden. It's just hard to figure out. In power in office or something like that, he might be another person. There are not many individuals out there that you can point to and say that person can ultimately rally the country.
I hope you're right, David Gergen. And speaking of soul searching, I've got to do some because I just referred to myself in the third person. Got to fix that. David Gergen, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Good to see you, sir.
Be well.
Thank you.
It should come as no surprise that the man who ginned up baseless voter fraud conspiracies, even after he won in 2016, but lost the popular vote by more than 2 million, is at it again. This time trying to delegitimize the 2020 election in its entirety. Trump spent the weekend with a combination of golfing and tweeting about how he, quote, won this election by a lot with his 71 million so-called legal votes, which he pointed out was the most ever for a sitting president. And while that very last part actually is true, the fact is Joe Biden got more votes than anyone ever. And yes, they're legal too. Still, Trump has, of course, refused to concede the race, and as his many lawsuits play out, he and his team are reportedly planning to hold rallies in the coming days to spread his baseless claims of voter fraud and coronavirus, no doubt, and to stoke outrage among his base. But how far might he really go to try to hold on to his power? How many more beyond Defense Secretary Esper might be fired in the process? How many pardoned? And how many money-making deals will be hatched before all is said and done? I'm joined now by someone with unique insight into the possibilities, the president's niece, Mary Trump, a clinical psychologist who analyzes her uncle's mental health, behaviors, and history in her book, Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. Mary Trump, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Has your uncle refused to concede because he actually thinks he won, or because he just simply can't accept losing?
Initially, it's always because he can't accept the bad news, and a loss is certainly the worst kind of news somebody like Donald could get. But he has shown himself expert at actually gaslighting himself, so there may come a time when he starts to believe his own lies.
You know, I'm going to quote you, if I may, from your book, Fred, as in your grandfather and Donald Trump's father. Fred's fundamental beliefs about how the world worked. In life, there can be only one winner. Everybody else is a loser, and kindness is weakness. Those were clear. Is that what this is all about?
Everything with Donald goes back to his father, my grandfather. He was a cruel man, and he had incredibly high standards when it came to his children fulfilling his own expectations. So Donald knows better than anybody that the worst thing you could be in my grandfather's eyes was a loser, and he has been shown to be that on many occasions. However, this is the first time in his life there hasn't been somebody to help spin it or to help bail him out of it.
You know, that's what comes clearest to me, is that at 73 or 74, whatever he is, he's never experienced this before. You either litigate your way out, you buy your way out a la Stormy Daniels, or you lie your way out. Thinking back to his time with Roy Cohn, when they were the losers in that housing discrimination lawsuit discriminating against black would-be renters, where they lost the case. They went out to the steps of the courthouse and relentlessly said, "We won," and never admitted otherwise.
That's right. And that has been a pattern for a very long time. And that won't change now. However, if the system holds, there will be no escaping it. The problem we face right now, though, is will the system hold?
Is Donald Trump suffering in your estimation?
Very much. Again, he's in a unique position for him. And my guess is that he is both enraged and terrified. But because he can't admit the fear to himself, because that's also a form of weakness, his rage is just going to become all-consuming.
Do you want him to suffer? I mean, you say in your book, you wrote this because of the damage he's done to the country, your family, obviously the cruelty that was done to your father, Donald Trump's oldest brother, by both Trump and your grandfather. Do you want Donald Trump to suffer?
Of course not. I don't want anybody to suffer, although honestly, in the last 4 years, a lot of us have been hard pressed not to engage in those kinds of feelings, as we've watched the cruelty exhibited by this administration, as we've watched our institutions and norms disintegrate. But of course, I don't want him to suffer. I do, however, want him to be held accountable.
When you say, of course, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but let me stay with it for a minute. I do a radio show during the day, and last week, I cannot tell you how many people called and said, I've never hated anybody in my whole life. I'm 72 years old until now. I have a woman called, I'll never forget, and she said, trust me, I'm a very kind person, but I want Donald Trump to suffer. So do you mean what you say, or are you just trying to be a kind and humane soul? I'm serious.
No, it's a great question, and I'm not laughing because of the question. I'm laughing because I'd like to think I am a kind and humane soul. But as I said, it's been very difficult in the last 4 years not to feel hatred, not to feel revengeful, because look at the damage that's being done. Look at the cruelty that's been enacted towards the most vulnerable people among us. It's incredibly difficult. The reason why I say, of course, isn't because I'm not inclined to want him to suffer. It's because if we allow that, it diminishes us, and that would be a lasting, horrible legacy of Donald J. Trump.
70 plus days until Joe Biden is sworn in, give or take a few. Chuck Todd from Meet the Press was on the radio with us about a week ago and said he believes, based on no information, just his sense of the world, is that Donald Trump's going to resign and say, you don't deserve me, I'm leaving. What do you think Donald Trump does in the next 70 days?
That's really interesting because before the election results came in, I was asked what he would do under what circumstances. And I said that if it was a landslide, he would be forced to spin away from that by claiming the American people don't deserve him. He was the best thing that ever happened to America, and he's going to go off and do something really important, like build Trump Tower in Moscow. This is a different situation, however. He's lost, but not by a large enough margin for it to serve as a total repudiation of him. I think the fact that Republicans as a party fared better than he did is also making this worse for him. So I'm not so sanguine about his resigning, because that would be to concede a loss. And I think that would be psychologically, difficult isn't a strong enough word. I don't want to say impossible, but it would be close to impossible for him to do that.
So what does he do? Put together a pardon list of his friends, puts together a firing list of his enemies, sends the kids out to cut deals that he'll be able to benefit from when he leaves the White House in late January. Is that what he does? I mean, what does he do for 2 months when he's stewing away in the Oval Office and on the second floor over there?
Hopefully Donald goes out and plays a lot of golf, because that would be the safest thing for all of us. I've thought for a while that if he lost, he would basically engage in a smash and grab in the next 72 days. What also I imagine he'll do is pardon a lot of people who really shouldn't be pardoned, which will demoralize a lot of us. As we saw with Esper, he will start firing people in key positions, which is very worrisome, but we'll have to see how that plays out. And the thing at the moment I'm most concerned about, although again, the firing thing, we need to keep our eyes on that, is that he is going to spend the next several weeks undermining the incoming Biden-Harris administration, which will make it harder for them to do the work that needs to be done, not just to start healing the divide, if to the extent that that's even possible, but to start a federal COVID response, et cetera, all of these things which need to be done.
You know, you either wrote or were quoted in a piece, I think you wrote it recently, about an issue that has been a major concern of mine for years in the Trump presidency, is the so-called Goldwater Rule that the American Psychiatric Association precludes professionals from essentially diagnosing a public figure, even though in the case of your uncle, we probably see more of him than most people like you see of their patients. Obviously, the Trump era is finished, at least for now. Do you think, as a result of the inhibitions that placed on people who maybe could have warned members of Congress or warned the American people what we might be dealing with, that there'll be relaxation of that going forward?
There better be. In my view, it's malpractice. It's, as I wrote in an op-ed recently, the Goldwater Rule, as it was originally written, precludes professionals, psychiatrists, from diagnosing a public figure, which is technically impossible anyway, so that's fine. But they expanded the rule in 2017, interestingly enough, so that mental health professionals who were members of the APA can't even speculate about a public figure's mental health, which is beyond absurd. It's dangerous. The American people need to be guided by experts. We have legal experts helping them understand what's going on with the Emoluments Clause or the Hatch Act or the failure to concede. We have medical doctors who walked us through the whole COVID-19 diagnosis that he received. So why is it only that psychiatrists, psychologists, et cetera, are not allowed to provide expertise to the American people?
We only have a minute left. Even if if professionals is not supposed to diagnose a public figure, could you diagnose the 70 million people who voted for him? They know what everybody else knows. Why did they stay loyal to Donald Trump, do you think?
We can explain some of that by the fact that, there's always 22% of any population that is on the extreme end. We have people who are just they belong to a party, they vote along party lines. This, however, is much worse than that. I find it soul-crushing. My guess is that there are a lot of people in this country who are subject to authoritarian personalities, and we need to figure out what to do about that.
How does Joe Biden figure out how to appeal to them?
I think what we're going to see during this transition is Joe Biden acting like a president for all Americans, who is trying from the very beginning to solve problems that need to be solved, while Donald continues to decompensate in the Oval Office, firing people randomly, sending out tweets that are getting flagged for misinformation, and just honestly behaving like somebody who never should have been within a million light years of the White House.
Mary Trump, thanks for having the courage to do what you've done, and I appreciate your time tonight as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. The book again is Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and of course, please stay safe.
Next time on Antiques Roadshow, we've got even more treasures from our 24th season tour all across America.
It's unique, and how often can you say that?
That's more than we thought.